So if you've ever wanted to get into reading or tried to get into reading and were unsuccessful, there's probably more than one reason as to why. Not just because you don't get it, reading's not for you. In my personal opinion, reading can be for absolutely anybody. It's not as niche of an interest as people try and make it. And the video is going to be broken up into chapters as to why people find it difficult. And as somebody who used to absolutely hate reading and now reads on average like 5 books a month. So first of all, reading is a really great hobby, but it is kind of overcomplicated. There's a lot of pressure surrounding reading ever since it became kind of like a trend. Book Talk and YouTube, a lot of people try and make it into this competition. You're not a valid reader if you don't read more than 5 books a month, 10 books a month, 100 books a year. People genuinely just do not have the time for that. Number one reason as to why people can't get into reading is because they set too high of expectations for themselves. Reading is not a one-size-fits-all type thing, but it's also not as hard as people make it seem. So a lot of people think, oh, I'll just start reading and read this book that everybody else is reading because apparently it's good, and if I don't like it, that means that I'm not gonna be a reader. Like, I don't like reading, I guess, if I don't like this one thing. This connects back to when they were in grade school and they had to read a book that they absolutely hated, and that doesn't help anybody because of course you hated a book you read in grade school. You didn't get to choose what you read back then, and a lot of people still think that they don't get to choose what they read. They're just gonna read what's popular, trying to get into reading. I think it's really important to be able to curate your specific genres, and then you can get a little bit better about maybe being a reader in 2024. And that doesn't mean that you become some insane reader and you read 300 books in a year. That's honestly super unrealistic for anyone.
I don't know anyone who's ever read 300 books in a
The
year.
assumptions surrounding reading. We're going to talk about why do people deem reading as this smart person thing. I've noticed that a lot, where people will automatically assume if you're a reader, that means that you have so much to offer in every area of conversation. You only read classics and you're probably a snob. There are so many different forms of readers, and a lot of people assume, oh, I'm a slow reader, I can't be a reader. In my personal opinion, it doesn't matter how slow or fast you read a book. If you're reading a book, you're a reader. I'm not good at reading, therefore I can't be a reader. To me, this is a thing that's really highly debated. Audiobooks are just as valid as physical books. I feel like the toxicity of reading when it comes to like different fandoms, like for example early 2000s when everybody was like, oh well, I prefer the books over the movies and this makes me superior to you because if you didn't read the Percy Jackson, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter books, then you're not as valid as somebody who did read all the books. But it really doesn't matter. As long as you are pertaining the information that you want to get, as long as you are getting something out of that series, you read it basically. Because in my opinion, listening to a book is just as big as an exercise as reading a book. Say you're dyslexic, you want to be a reader, you listen to audiobooks and you love it, but you think, oh well, I'm not technically a reader though because I'm not reading a physical book. You're still a reader. You're still pertaining the information that a reader would. You're just listening to it instead of reading it. And to me, if you listen to a whole audiobook in one sitting, you read a book in one sitting. Like, audiobooks is just an easier way to get into reading, in my opinion. It's a good little gateway to, say you're starting a series, you're not sure how you feel about it, you're like, oh, okay, I'll listen to the audiobook. If I can get into the audiobook, great, then I'll read the book. That happens a lot with me personally because I find it difficult to get into books. Say you want to read A Little Life. It's 814 pages. Wow, I really want to read this, but I'm not good with getting used to books. Those first 50 pages are a struggle for me. I can't remember names as well. Me personally, I remember names so much better when I listen to an audiobook before I go into reading. And if you like audiobooks more than you like reading, go ahead. That's totally fine. You're still reading. It's still a book. You need to find your way of reading that's accessible to you. Whether you're a busy person, so you need to do audiobooks, whether you need shorter form books because you don't have as great of an attention span, whether you need to read when you're listening to music or you need to read in complete silence. There are so many different forms of learning that is not just the like cookie cutter version of I'm gonna sit down and read this book. That people think is that they don't have any time, and this is where my background kind of comes in because As someone who really started reading in 2021, when I had all of the free time in the world, I would go to school, come home, and just read all the time because I didn't have any extracurriculars, I didn't have a job, I just went to school every day and I would read at school. And I think I read 45-50 books in just my freshman year of high school. Then going to sophomore year, I had to find ways to make time for reading. I personally don't agree with finding the time. I believe in making time. Now, there doesn't seem to be a difference in those two things, but to me, finding time is saying, okay, well, I have this much stuff to do. I guess I'll read in this little baby window that I found. For me, it's about making time. Okay, I have class from 10 to 12, and then I have my other class from 12 to 2, and then when I come home, I won't have any time. I guess I'll just not read. No, I tell myself, okay, well, if I can get my studying done during class, then, you know, in between those periods where they're like, okay, 10-minute break, I do my studying during that time, or I read during that time, because it's a good way for me to, I'm not at home, so I can't just make an excuse and be like, oh, I don't have time for reading now. You can read during that 10-minute break in your class period. Literally just read any chance you get and make time for it, because when you're making time, you're saying, okay, if I can get these 3 assignments done in 30 minutes instead of 3 hours. You're somebody who is used to coming home and kind of like passively doing your homework for 3 hours instead of doing your homework as fast as you can and then giving yourself time for free time. Because for me, when I think, okay, I have from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. to do these 4 assignments, and then I'll just be done for the day, I won't do anything else. Instead, I tell myself, okay, I have from 3 to 6 to do 3 assignments and read. So I need to figure out a way to get those 3 assignments done in a shorter amount of time than 3 hours so that I can then focus on what I want to do later. So that's for me what making time is just being the most efficient person you can be so you have time for that relaxation. People work full-time jobs, and as somebody who is in an extracurricular, I do an all year round sport. I am a part-time college student, part-time high school student. I have a part-time job, and I'm not home a lot because of that. I find literally every chance possible to read. I'm talking when I'm on breaks at my job, I read. It's literally so easy to. It's actually kind of how I time my breaks. Say I get a 15-minute break, I literally just set a timer for 15 minutes and I read. I also read while eating, which some people don't like doing, and so for my lunches at work, which is 30 minutes long typically, I will eat and read for 30 minutes. So that's personally what I do, but it is so easy to think that you have no time to do something, but it is also so easy to make time to do something. So instead of scrolling on your phone for 15 minutes, which is so easy to do when you're in that sort of waiting period, you know, before you're going somewhere, you're waiting for your Uber to arrive, you're waiting for your ride to come, whatever. Instead of scrolling on your phone for those 15 minutes, read for those 15 minutes. Those waiting periods happen so much more in life than you think. Say you're picking up a sibling from a practice, you're going somewhere and you're in a car for 30 minutes. Read in those 30 minutes, unless you get car sick. I don't want you to get car sick. Read in those 30 minutes instead of just waiting on your phone. And a big part of having no time to read is not bringing a book with you everywhere, and suddenly having free time when you're waiting for something or something's going on but you have no idea what you're doing, and you're like, oh, I could be reading right now. That's something that I really implemented in my life, is that I bring a book everywhere. Literally everywhere I go, I have a book with me. You have time to do stuff, you read. It's literally the easiest solution to having no time, because everybody knows that there are times in your life where you have waiting periods, where you're waiting for something to happen, waiting for somebody to get in your car, whatever. Read in those times, don't scroll on your phone. It's such an easy shift to make, and I know it's hard to not like just go on your phone when you're doing things. And I mean, don't put pressure on yourself. If you are tired and you feel like you can't read in that time period, don't. Go on your phone, it's fine. Like, that goes with the assumption that if you're a reader, you need to be reading all the time. I'm not saying making time means you read every single possible chance you get. I'm saying if you want to maximize your reading time and you have free time, then read in that free time. But if you are reading for say 10 minutes, you have a 30-minute waiting period. If I'm on my break and I'm reading and I don't like the book that I'm reading, I do this thing where I give it 3 more pages. If in 3 more pages that I can give my full attention to that book and it doesn't intrigue me, I close the book and I try again later. Because you shouldn't be forcing yourself to read. It's not about forcing yourself to read. It's about if you want to read and you think you have no time, so that when you have time and you want to read, you are reading. You're not making an excuse to not read. You're not bringing a book with you because you don't think you're gonna have any time to read it. Bring a book with you even if you don't think you have the time. I think that a lot of people struggle to get into reading because they don't know what they're gonna like yet. A lot of people, when they're younger, they really hate every single book they read in school, and that makes them think, oh, I hate reading, I'll never like it. But I feel like it's so easy to just get lost in what everybody else is doing, and you never find out what you actually like as a reader. So for me, I remember when I first got into reading, I wanted to be a classics girl because I've always loved learning, I love school, and so I thought I would love classics. I have not found a single classic that I have liked that I wanted to just keep reading it. I liked Little Women. It was one of my top 5 books of 2023, but it wasn't like my favorite book ever. There were periods in that time where I was reading it where I was like, I don't care about what's going on right now. So I really think that it's important to not just assume what genres you'll like. It's a good starting point. It's a good way to start reading things, and then if you don't like it, move on. But don't get so stuck on the idea that like, I want to be this type of person because I wanted to be that smart reader. I wanted to be that type of person, so I need to read these types of books. And also, you know, you can start with saying, oh, I really love rom-coms, so I'll start by reading this novel. I really love Star Wars, so I'll start by reading sci-fi. I really love the Lord of the Rings movies, so maybe I'll try the Lord of the Rings books. Your movie taste can be drastically different to your reading taste, which seems strange. It seems like they would be one and the same, but reading, it's a little bit harder to get involved with what you're doing than watching a movie is. You can passively watch a movie about most things and you'll understand it. That doesn't mean that you will love a book in that genre. Me personally, I really love fantasy movies. I love the Lord of the Rings series, I love the Hobbit series, but I absolutely hated the books. I couldn't stand them. They were long, they were annoying. If you are trying to get into certain genres, don't just hone in on a genre that you're like, I think this will be my thing, so I'm just gonna read books in that genre. I mean, try and really like dig deep. Think about what you have enjoyed in the past. Maybe it's movies, maybe it's a TV show. Just think about something that is really close and personal to you and try and find a short book from that genre. Don't try and start with an 800-page book. Like, say you like literary fiction, you want to get into it, sort of. Don't start with A Little Life. Start with something like Normal People by Sally Rooney, okay? Start with a shorter book compared to a longer book that's going to be harder for you to get into. It's not going to be as easy, and you're going to lose interest so fast, and you're going to feel so discouraged if you're 100 pages in. You're like, wow, I really like this book. I have 700 pages left to go. You're not going to be happy about that. Instead, you want to think, wow, I'm 100 pages in, I only have 100 pages to go, and I will have read my first book. That is so much better of a feeling to feel than, oh, this was not a great experience, but at least I read an 800-page book. Like, start with something you genuinely think you will like, and start with a short book in that genre, and try and experience with as many genres as you can. I was really under the impression that I only liked romance books. That's kind of how I felt. When I was in sophomore year, I really got into dystopian books, and then that led me to romance books that were in a different genre, and then that led me into fantasy books. And I think it's really a misconception about reading that there's only certain genres, that you think, oh, there's only romance books and they're all these like annoying ones with these weird characters and they're always like lovey-dovey and weird, whatever. And then you think, oh, there's fantasy books, but they're always really confusing, and I'm not that type of person who can get sucked into a story like that because there's too much world building and I don't understand it. And dystopian books are only made for 14-year-old girls and they're not interesting enough for me. There are so many subgenres in your main genres. It's actually incredible how big of a range there is just within one genre. For example, you're talking about romance. There's so many different kinds of romance books. There's dark romance, there's different tropes, there's series, there's non-series, there's interconnected series, there's standalone series. There's all of these different ways that you can get involved. Like, making time for reading, it becomes so much easier when you're reading books that you love. I would recommend, say you're like, oh, I want to get into romance books, but I really want this very niche thing, to just look up that very niche thing. Like, Google the type of characters you like. It'll come up with certain books that you can read that have those characters. I highly recommend Pinterest. If you literally just type in, for example, I don't know, Mafia Boss Romance. Like, I don't know, you do you. Like, you're like, oh, Mafia Boss Romance. It'll come up with a list that you can just look at if you want. There's just so many different types of books. I'm just gonna do a quick little demonstration. I got 6 books just now, and they are all romance books, and I am just gonna show how different romance books can be and how you can really find anything for anybody. Okay, I have read all of these books, by the way. So you've got a competition involved, you've got murder involved, you've got fantasy involved, rivals involved, you've got celebrities involved, you've got professional sports involved, you've got princesses. And this guide isn't meant to be overwhelming, but more so like introduce you to the possibilities that not every book has to be the same. I think when you're a new reader, it's really important to curate the genre that you like. And yes, you should be trying things from multiple different aspects, but you still should be trying to gear it to who you are as a person, not just what's popular. Okay, now I'm gonna get into some book recs. So I'm just gonna give a few little recommendations that are short books, which is something I talked about, appeal to a large audience, and some niche books that maybe people don't tend to talk about. So for historical fiction, I would recommend Snowflower and the Secret Fan. I've talked about this book before. I don't have a physical copy of it. I've talked about Snowflower and the Secret Fan before. It's a sort of olden China book, and it focuses on the history of foot binding, but it's through the perspective of these 2 young girls, and it's about how they grow together and then grow apart, and it's about marital traditions there. It's sort of a calm book, and it really introduces you into the genre of historical fiction, and it's pretty short. It's not a super long book. I think it's like 200 pages. And it's just a really nice atmospheric book, and I feel like a lot of history books are very atmospheric. I want to get into historical fiction. As for romance, that is such a big genre. I just covered 6 books that are really great that I recommend. And honestly, romance, a short book that I would recommend, if you want like YA, it's just fun, there's some background stuff, you don't have to read every book, but you can. I would definitely recommend anything by Sarah Adams. She makes really easily accessible, easy to read. They're YA, there's no spicy stuff or anything. I really love her books. I think they're really good. I would recommend these. They're also really short. They're just little short reads. They tend to be from 200 pages to 300 pages, and they're just cute. They don't have a ton going on as in side plots, but I do still find them very interesting. I need to get out of here soon. But yeah, she made both of these books. This is a sports romance. This is a small town romance. And they're both YA. The characters are written really well, and they all have very unique personalities. Of a YA book series, and you want something that has more going on to it, that's like, it's not just the romance, I would recommend The Selection. Now, the politics that are written in this book aren't great, but they're still easy to understand. It is a romance. I found it really interesting. I read it at the perfect age. I read it when I was 14, so I really highly recommend this book series. This first book is also pretty small. The second book is only like, I'd say 100 pages more than this one, and the third book is also like pretty short. So that's why I recommend this book series. Again, politics aren't great. Don't come for like a really accurate dystopian book, but I do think it's easy to digest and it's a good book for starters. This book they're standalones that you can read together, and I would recommend this if you really want like some background plot but you also like spicier books. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone who is under 16, just so you know. This is an LGBTQ book. There's not really much to say about it. I don't remember it super well. I read it like 3 years ago. It wasn't my favorite series, but it does have some little fantasy things. If you liked Harry Potter when you were younger, you might like this. And those are my recommendations for fantasy. As for classics that are short, I would recommend The Great Gatsby because it is a very short book. Little Women is really great for the girlies, but it is a very long book. So if you want a short classic, I would definitely recommend Great Gatsby. It's only like 100 pages, so you'll get done with it pretty quick. At least my version is 100 pages. My version's kind of weird looking, but my version is only 100 pages. I think that's about the end of my recs. Just to wrap up as a conclusion, you don't need to read 50 books in a year to be a good reader. You don't even need to read physical books to be a great reader. You can just enjoy it. I do think that it's a hobby that has been for everybody for a long time. Reading has been a part of hobbies for so long, but I feel like as of recent it has had kind of a renaissance, if you will. But I don't think that means that it needs to be this hobby that you track and you care so much about. I personally love tracking what I read. That's a personally for me thing. If you're first getting into reading, I don't think it's healthy to track your reading as much as I did when I first started reading. It definitely made me burn out, and it made me kind of resent the idea of reading later on because I felt the pressure to, I have to finish this book even though I don't like it. You can DNF books. It's okay to not like a book and decide you don't want to finish it. It's really not that big of a deal. It's not worth being like, oh, I need to finish it even though I have like 300 pages left because I started it and now I want to finish a book. It's okay to just not read a book if you don't like it. So those are just the things I wanted to go over. I really hope that people get into reading because I honestly feel so bad for people who have never experienced that feeling of reading a book and everything else goes away. Like, you suddenly are that character, you're in the mindset, and you have never been in a better situation for that. I honestly just really pity people who have never felt that experience of being totally like connected to a book before. And reading is just such an amazing hobby that I have enjoyed so much throughout just my entire life, really. I used to not like reading when I was younger. I couldn't focus. I was a very restless child. And now I read all the time, and I do it in my free time, and I get sad when I don't have time to read, and it's just really important to me. So I just really hope that even if you decide reading isn't for you, if you don't like it, I hope that you still are able to find one book that you felt impacted by, you enjoyed, and yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna cut it off. But I hope you have a good day, and I hope you find a book that you like.